Hey everyone, welcome to the DesuckifyWork Podcast. Today I'm speaking with Jason Fried, co-founder of 37 Signals, best known for Basecamp, the only project management software that ever made sense to me. They also created Hey Email and are getting ready to launch a new calendar app in 2024. Jason is one of the primary inspirations for this whole Desuckify thing. He and co-founder David Heinemeier Hansson's book, It Doesn't Have to Be Crazy at Work, opened my eyes to the gaslighting reality so many of us have endured in the workplace. Endless meetings, non-sensical communication, a million cooks with zero accountability. None of it is necessary. Who knew? In this episode, Jason and I get into all of that and more. We talk about the freedom that comes with time constraints. We talk about the fruitless pursuit of estimating and how humans are simply not capable of doing it well. And we touch on this crazy idea that I vaguely remember reading about in my economics textbooks way back. Tell me if you've heard of it. It's called profitability. Apparently it's something businesses should strive for if they want to create a workplace that isn't insane. Not insane sounds pretty delightful to me. Let's hear more about that. Okay, everybody, welcome to the DesuckifyWork Podcast. Today, we've got Jason Fried as our guest. He's from 37 Signals. Jason, nice to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Awesome. Well, Jason, I've followed you for a bit now, and so I'm familiar with what you guys do and some of your perspectives on work, and I'd love for people to start to experience that who maybe aren't familiar with you. So maybe we can start by just, if you get a second to introduce yourself and tell people what you do and what you're most excited about right now.
Sure. I run a company called 37 Signals. We're most well known for a product called Basecamp. So some people may not know 37 Signals, but may know Basecamp.
Yep.
And then we also make a product called Hey, Hey.com, which is a new email service we launched a few years ago. So that's what we do. We've been in business for about 24 years so far, strapped, and primarily we've been remote most of our life as a company. And we have a lot of different views on business that I would say in our industry are unconventional. Remote working is something we've been doing for a long time. That's just now recently, of course, become the thing. 4-day work weeks in the summer. We've been doing that for well over a decade. We keep the company as small as we possibly can. So we have about 80 people now, which is the biggest we've ever been, but we've always been well under 100 people. And many of the companies we compete with have hundreds, if not thousands of people. So we believe in small teams and small companies. And we write a bunch of books and share everything we know about what we do. So there's really no proprietary anything. It's just all out in the open. So anyway, that's, kind of maybe a brief opening summary of some of the things that we're doing.
I love it. I mean, I think we're going to probably touch on a bit of all of those things because I think together they sort of form a somewhat unconventional, as you said, perspective on work. I think from my perspective, a lot of those things could certainly help to use my language, desuckify work. Yeah. So I want to dig into that a little bit. In terms of the sort of state of work, I don't know how much you're sort of paying attention to the world at large. I know you're on LinkedIn a lot, so I assume you're seeing some of the stuff there. What's your take on where we are with work right now? How does it feel to you?
I think there's a lot of there's been a lot of change over the past few years, obviously with COVID, and then everyone getting forced into remote work. And then now companies are trying to figure out what to do. Like now that they don't have to work remotely anymore, do they still want to? Do they not want to? Or they're exploring hybrid? So there's a lot of turbulence. I think it feels very turbulent actually at the moment. Yeah. Plus, the economy is a little tricky. Like the stock market's been doing well, but interest rates are high. So a lot of the free money that was being essentially given out and VC money has been, has been pulled back. So there's a lot less of that. So it's less frothy, at least in my industry and many others that depended on outside funding. People are having to get serious now about profits and costs, and these are new things for a lot of companies to think about, because for a long time they didn't have to worry about this stuff. It was all about valuation. It wasn't about profitability. So there's a lot of change in the air. I think these are all good changes. I think profitability is important. I don't think it's healthy to run on other people's fuel. I think you need to produce your own, basically. And I although I don't I don't know about the remote hybrid in the office transitions. Everyone's got their own thing. Everyone's got their own company, their own way. I know that a lot of employees like to stay remote, and then a lot of companies don't want them to. So there's a lot of that going on. We're remote. We're going to be that way, but it's not right for everybody. So everyone's got to figure out their own thing. And then the other thing I would say is that I think companies are realizing that they are probably a bit bloated and probably doing a lot of things they didn't need to do. And that's forcing some changes internally too, about how many people do they need? What do they need people working on? What's worth doing? What isn't worth doing? So there's a lot of that going on too. So it's an interesting time. I'd say it's very transitional right now.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. Transitional. I like the word turbulent because that, you talk about your industry, and I come from the world of advertising and marketing. It's similar in that space, partly because I think some of our business comes from the world of tech and software and all that, but also just there was that early COVID kind of like craze where suddenly everybody was just hiring everybody. And then it went away as inflation and interest rates went up. So I think a lot of people are feeling that. And I think it adds to something that you probably touched on. I don't know how many years ago you wrote this book, but you wrote a book called, you and your co-founder, David, wrote a book called It Doesn't Have to Be Crazy at Work. And that is actually how I discovered you. I knew of Basecamp, and then I read that book and I was like, well, yeah, I've always felt like it doesn't have to be crazy, but yet it is. Almost everywhere I've gone, there's some degree of crazy, and it's just how much you dial that up. So one, when you wrote that, what were your thoughts on how to make it not crazy? And then do those lessons still apply today now that things are a little bit more turbulent?
Yeah, I don't have the book in front of me, but the cover basically says it all. So the cover is a list of things that most people do at work, and we have a big X through it. And like it doesn't. So things like, working weekends, pulling all-nighters, 80-hour work weeks, meetings, lots of meetings, impossible deadlines, which we call dreadlines. There's a lot of that stuff. So, it came because we were originally going to call the book The Calm Company, which is we try to think of ourselves as relatively calm, not all the time, but most of the time. But the subtitle was It Doesn't Have to Be Crazy at Work.
Right.
But when I kept asking people how it was at work, I asked friends, hey, how's it going? What's going on at work? They're always like, it's crazy. It's crazy. Everyone says that. Yeah. And I don't identify with that. Like, I don't feel like work's crazy. There's some times where we push a little bit harder and that, but that's like, same with life. Sometimes you go to the gym, like you push harder, but you're not doing that all day long. So I just recognize work should be a relatively calm place where you can do really good work and have 8 hours and do good work, and that's enough. And so we just kept hearing this crazy. So we're like, we should flip this and basically like address this head on, because most people's work environments they would consider to be crazy. And the problem is that it was sort of a badge of honor for quite a while, and still is for some, which is it's crazy. I'm working crazy hours. It's like, yeah, but why? And what are you getting out of that? And what are the costs of that? So we just want to shine a light on the fact that it doesn't have to be that way. That companies can run in a more sane, calm, controlled manner, and that you don't need to put in all this extra work, because most of it is being spent on things that aren't worth doing in the first place. That's the sort of the deeper message. It's like you can work, but if you only need to do 10 or 20% of that anyway, what are you doing? So we wanted to shine a light on that, and then share again. Our books are basically like, we think of them as cookbooks. These are essentially our recipes for how we run our business. And so that's our latest cookbook that came out a few years ago, which is sort of our point of view on how to keep it calm, essentially. And so if people are interested in that, that's a good one to read.
Yeah, I highly recommend it. And it's funny, when you started ticking off all the things that are on the cover, I was just like, well, that just sounds like work to me.
Right.
Like I like long hours, working weekends a lot. I mean, the meeting thing. And I think I like your point towards the end there, where you got into this idea of we tend to do a lot of things we don't need to do. And that definitely rings true. And I think you'd find that in a lot of industries. But I think what people struggle with is, how do I know what I shouldn't be doing and what I should be doing? Because that's where you might get 20 different opinions. So how do you guys figure that out?
Yeah, what's worth doing is a hard one. I feel like it takes some time to settle in and build up the instincts and the muscle memory there.
Yeah.
One of the things is that we force ourselves into a structure that prevents us from doing too many things. So for example, on any given feature that we're working on for Basecamp or Hey, or any new product that we're doing, only 2 people can work on it. So one programmer, one designer.
Well,
that's it. And they have a maximum of 6 weeks to deliver the whole thing. And most things take less time. So we already say like 6 weeks is the most we're willing to spend on any new feature, not product. A product is a string of, if we're building a new product, it's many strings of 6 weeks at a time. But every 6 weeks we launch new stuff for Basecamp and Hey. And so that's it, 6 weeks and 2 people. And so what that does is it forces you into really getting good at what we call scope hammering, which is like, here's the big scope, and we need to hammer this thing down into a small enough nugget that we can actually get it done. And so when you only have a few people and you don't have that much time, you actually get real pretty quick. Like you build up, you understand, you ultimately figure out what are the essentials here? What's the core? What needs to happen? What can we not do? What can we save for another time, maybe? And you just get good at narrowing it down. It's no different than, well, there's this maxim, I think it's called Parkinson's law, which is work expands to fill the time available. And it's just so true.
Yeah.
And so you give something forever, well, then it's going to take forever. You give something a short period of time, it's going to take a short period. If today we're talking on a Friday, if something needed to be done by Wednesday of next week, and normally you were given 2 weeks to do it, but someone's like, I need it by Wednesday, you'll get it done on Wednesday. Right. And what you'll do is you'll do a simpler version of it. You'll cut things out of it because you simply can't do all the things you'd want to do. And it'll be a better version. It'll probably be better. Wow. So what we do is we know the human instincts are not on our side here. Like we want to put in the extra time. We want to do more. We want to make it perfect, all the things. So we sort of structurally prevent ourselves from falling into those traps. That's the best way I've found to not get carried away with making things like kind of take forever and do too many things that you don't need to do.
Wow. I mean, there's a couple things in there that struck me as interesting.
Another thing, actually, let me add one more thing to that.
Go ahead.
This is a terrible analogy, but if your house was burning down and you had 5 minutes to take the important things, like you would know what they would be. If I said you need to move out of your house in 3 weeks and you need to put together a collection of all the most important things, you would procrastinate. Your list of things would be way bigger. You'd probably get to the end and go, oh my God, should I not? But again, not a good analogy because you don't want your house burned. But if you need to get out in 5 minutes, you will make decisions and they'll be clear and crisp, and maybe you left something behind that you wouldn't have, but I bet you're going to pick the things that really matter. And that's kind of what we're trying to do in a sense with the way we.
Yeah.
Without the hair on fire, without the hair or the fire scariness.
Right.
But, the same concept.
Yeah. And I think what I wonder about in that scenario, a couple of things. One, how did you get there? Meaning, did you always kind of have a vision of that basic concept of minimal time and small teams, or did you have to kind of fumble a little bit to get there?
We had it to some degree, but then we fumbled over many years. One of the advantages of being in business for a couple decades is like you have the time to hone your craft and your approach and your systems and try things that work and don't work. So, but we've always had the like small companies where it's at, small teams where it's at. We've always had that. We used to have a 3-person team working on things. Now it's 2. So we've actually honed in there more. Wow. But there was also times in our history where we would do things and they would take as long as they take. Like, how long is this going to take? As long as it takes until we're satisfied. So we did that method for a long time. And that turns out like you end up spending 3 months on something that should have taken 3 weeks. But since there's no limit, you just keep going. Right. And maybe in some ways it turns out better, but was it worth the extra, not 10 weeks or something like that? So usually not. Yeah. So then you get frustrated. Then you like shorten that. And then you shorten that, and then maybe you over shorten it, and then you have to expand it again. We sort of settled in on this idea of 6-week cycles. So 6-week cycles, meaning 6 weeks is the most time that we all give anything individually to get out the door. Again, not a new product, but a feature for an existing product. Yeah. It's 6 weeks felt right. It's enough time. You can sort of see the end when you start. You never get stuck in something that goes on and on and on and on and on, because that's a huge morale killer. Is where you've probably been being in the advertising industry, you probably work for clients who will remain nameless, right? But who just couldn't make up their mind, and the project kept going and going and going. And by the end, it's like all the excitement is blown out of it because you're like, this is just another take. We're watering it down. It's becoming diluted. And that's what happens when things just go on and on and on. They rarely get better. They often get worse. So just having to recognize that has allowed us to kind of find our way. And this is where we're currently at. Ask us in 5 years, we might have tweaked this a little bit. I don't know, but that's where we're at today. And we wrote a book on this called Shape Up.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, I saw something about
basecamp.com/shapeup, one word. You can download it for free, read it for free, read it online. And that's our whole point of view on how to work, very specifically, our work methods. So it doesn't have to be crazy at work, and rework are our business ideas. But Shape Up is really how we work on a day-to-day basis based on the 6-week cycle system, two teams, the whole thing, or 2 people teams, or 2-person teams, so on.
Oh, I like that. I mean, I think what I like about your books, I mean, you talk about them as kind of like cookbooks, and I think of them almost as like, if anybody wants to experiment with what you guys do, you've basically just laid out some manuals for them. And so the Shape Up book sounds interesting because it does get into the day-to-day 6-week cycle thing, which I hear that again through the lens of where I've been. Yeah, maybe some projects took 6 weeks, but a lot didn't. And sometimes even longer deadlines felt crazy because I think we got caught in the trap of maybe doing more than we really needed to do. But there's one thing I think you mentioned, and it may be in that book, but I read it somewhere, that you have the 2-person team, but before they start on something, part of this Shape Up idea is that I don't know if it's just you and some of the other leaders, but you shape and sort of refine the ask so that it is sort of in this middle ground of like not baked fully, but enough that you can kind of know what you need to do. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. So before we take on any projects, before projects are assigned out to teams of 2, they're shaped. That's where Shape Up comes from. Shaped means they're thought about. Sometimes you can think about it for 5 minutes and you got it. Other times it's like, it's been in your head for 4 months. Other times it's like, we've got a week to figure out something. So whatever it is, but there comes a point where the idea is crystallized enough that we can write it up with a couple really rough sketches. We use like thick Sharpie markers so we don't go into any detail. This is just like, here's roughly the idea. Here's the direction. Here's why we want to build this thing. Here's some details that might help, but it's not a functional specification in that it doesn't say it must do these 18 things this way. These are all the tasks that are going to be required. There's nothing. It's a generic outline, general thing that points a team in a direction, and then it's up to the team to figure out how to get that thing done. Now, tied to what we call the shaping document and this is a fundamental difference too, is what's called an appetite, not an estimate. So we do not estimate how long things will take. We instead have an appetite for how much we're willing to spend on that thing. Similarly, like, let's say you're going to Vegas. You're like, okay, I'm going to bring $500 and like, that's it. And if I lose it, I'm out.
Yep.
That's an appetite.
Yeah.
If you go to Vegas and go, I don't know what I'm going to lose, like unlimited money, I'm maybe going to lose $500, maybe going to lose 1,000. That's an estimate. Right. And they're always wrong. So you go to Vegas, you don't have the appetite, you have the estimate, and you just keep, oh God, I got to go back to the ATM and get that money back. And before you know it, you're down $2,500 or whatever. And you're like, oh my God, what have I done? So we have appetites, meaning we're willing to give this feature, this thing. We think this is it's worth 3 weeks of our time. That's it. And if it goes longer than that, it doesn't happen. Sometimes we might give it a couple days extra, but it's never like weeks extra. It's like, this is our appetite. This is it. And that is a huge difference. It's one word, but it's everything.
Yeah.
Because humans are terrible estimators. Every project that's ever been estimated has gone pretty much over budget, over time, always, because we're just not good at it. The future is very unpredictable. And most estimates are pretty far out in the future. You don't estimate something's going to take 1 day. It's like, no, it's going to take 9 months. You're going to be wrong. There's no way you're going to be right. Impossible. So appetites are better. And then they have a hard stop. And we have this thing called the circuit breaker. You can kind of pull the circuit breaker early if we're like, whoa, as we got into this, we're realizing that we just got it wrong. It's going to take much more time than we thought. Then we can discuss how to trim it down It's rarely add more time. It's just what's the simplest version of this? Is there a simpler version of that? So that's the constraint that's really important to us.
Wow. Yeah, it seems like you guys bake a lot of discipline into the way you work, and not in a like sort of militaristic, scary sounding discipline, but like very fundamental rules and process and an approach that keeps you honest.
Because humans suck at this, and we're humans. Yeah. We suck at estimates. We're everyone is. Like, how long is it going to take you to get to the grocery store? You go like every couple of days, and like you're often wrong because there's some car stuck in the road, or you can't find parking, or someone calls you on the phone, and you got to take like. There's a million things we just don't know, and the further out you go, and the bigger the estimate, the more inaccurate it's going to be. The further out you go, the less you know about what's going to happen. But we just do it to ourselves all the time. So we know, like, we are idiot humans. We have to put some discipline, some guardrails in for us because we know what's going to happen if we don't. It's just about being honest about human nature. So your point is, it's not militaristic discipline. It's the complete opposite. It's very open-ended in hey, team, you figure this out. You figure out what makes sense. You can tweak it, whatever. It's not like it's rigid. It's not rigid. The appetite's rigid. Right. Time is rigid. The idea is malleable. And so it's very open in that way, but we cannot blow time because humans will just keep blowing time on stuff if there's not a clear break.
I get that. I mean, I think I would say that's perhaps one of the biggest challenges certainly in the world I come from, but I think from what I hear from others too, is we really just are not willing to accept what human nature is. And so we tend to think in terms of what we want human nature to be, what it should be. I should be good at estimating. Why aren't you good at estimating? I should be able to understand how long this one thing will take. I should be good at all of these things that we're just not good at. Honestly, that conversation with a lot of companies and just going like, just look at your last year. How did your people behave?
Right.
Use that as your guideline rather than what you think they should do. How did you get comfortable, or how are you so clear on accepting the limitations of us as humans?
It's a great question. I mean, it's because I like to make progress. And the other way is not how you make progress. It's how you get stuck in the mud. And so at some point, like if we like to make progress, we like to ship things, we like to launch things, we like to build new things, we want to get on to the next thing. Then you got to find a system that's going to help you do that, because otherwise you're going to be stuck in the mud, stuck on working something for 9 months that should have taken 4 weeks. And then what ends up happening is that you have to keep saving face. So like, gosh, like we've already spent 6 months on this. I can't give up now. Like you got another month. And before you know, it's 9 months. And you're like, well, now we really can't give up because look at all the work we're throwing out. So we just like, if you want to make progress and you're not, you got to look at a different way of doing things. And so it's based in that frustration that we felt ourselves learning how to do it this way that made us want to find a way to do it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it's really just that difference between really being blindly optimistic about what we're capable of versus being just completely realistic about what we're capable of. And I think for some people that feels like defeat, but to your point, it actually opens up much more possibility and much more room for progress.
Yeah, I think, it can, I can see how it can feel that way to some, but really it's like, that's just our nature. Like it's not, you can't feel defeated by your nature. It just is. Your nature just is. And humans are not good at estimating, and humans are very good at giving things more time. And humans are there's a lot of loss aversion. So they don't want to give up on something that they spend a lot of time on, which makes things later and later and later. It just is like, and so the sooner you get to recognize your own nature and the nature of your species, the more progress you're going to make, which is what everyone's really trying to do. Everyone really wants to make progress. That's what we all want to do. So just be honest with yourself and recognize that, like, if you like the work, this is the fun work. The fun work is not getting stuck in a slog. That's not the fun work. There's something creative about getting stuck. Like trudging through something that never seems to end. That's not, that's like where creativity goes to die. You know, it's like, it's more fun to have some constraints that are reasonable, and you get to work, and then you move on to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, and get better and better and better, and put things out there in the world that people can see. There's almost like there's no choice. It's like you're so driven you want to build and make that you have to find a way to do it, and you can't do it by getting stuck.
Yeah. Well, and I think that probably also comes back a little bit to your philosophy on profitability, right? Because I think if you operate in a world where you have to be able to fund what comes next for yourself, that forces you to get real, versus if you're knowing that you're going to have some funding coming in from investors or whatever, you can both count on that to some degree, maybe not as much today, but also know that you have a story that you can probably tell to get more of that money when you need to, even though you're operating in a way that's not efficient at all. So profitability is big for you guys, and it's not been big, particularly in your industry, in a lot of ways. Yeah. Has it always been that way for you? Did you kind of decide that at the outset, and what made you?
By the way, it's very insightful that you can see the line between it, because there's a very clear line, and I don't think a lot of people see it. So your business model has so much to do with what you're capable of actually doing. The fact that we are self-funded, purely funded through revenues from customers, means we don't have money to waste. We don't want to waste money. It's money we've earned rather than money we've been given. And you tend to value that more. It's like any scarce resource. If I have, if I'm on a hike and I have a bottle of water, like, I'm not chugging it all right now. If I've got 4 more hours to go, like, you're careful about it. If you've got like an unlimited amount of water, you're just chugging whatever. I mean, that's probably a bad analogy again, but you know what I mean? Like, the thing is, the VC is like the unlimited fuel, unlimited water kind of thing. And you just don't care. And then you get sloppy because you don't care. So we'll hire more people, throw more people at the problem, get bigger and bigger and bigger. But what you're doing the whole time is creating more mass, and more mass, the more mass of an object, the more energy it takes to change its direction, just like basic physics. And it's very hard to create structure to hold up the whole all that mass. So you have multiple layers of management and all the stuff that comes with having a lot of money and hiring a lot of people, and that slows everything down. And before, you'll never have a 2-person team. Then every team's 12 people, because all these different groups need to be represented in the. This is just what happens, and it all ties back to business model. Bootstrap companies that only have a few people do not have a lot of layers. They do not have the luxury of time. They do not have the luxury of endless money and endless amount of mistakes they can keep making. They just have to get it right or figure out a way to do it and get better fast. So it does come back to that. To your question, has that always been true for us? We've been profitable since the beginning, every year for 24 years. And that is the only metric we really, really look at, is profitability. And not even like, are we more profitable this year than we were last year? I don't care. If we're like less profitable 3 years in a row, I kind of just don't care, as long as it's not like radically different. So if we're on a downward slope for a bit, I don't even care. As long as we're making more money than we spend, we can stay in business yet another year. I'm good with that. I'd like it to go up. But even stable is fine. I'm talking about profitability, not revenue, not user counts. A lot of companies have all these metrics that are basically obfuscating the truth, which is like, can you stay in business? If you have your user growth through the roof, like if you're losing money on each one, not good. So we look at profitability. So that is something we do focus on, and have always focused on and always cared about.
There's a couple of interesting things in there. One, when I think about the VC model, or even to some degree, corporate models, running through the market, that inability to be good at estimating makes the betting that takes place with the money that's being given sort of just wildly speculative, right? So I'm saying, your company, I'm going to throw 20 million in this round to your company based on you thinking that you're headed to this place, but you really have no idea. The idea of estimating, I think you talk about planning too, that it's really kind of guessing. That makes me question that model on some level, because you're betting on a future state that is basically just somebody going, I think, or I've planned, or I've tried to estimate this thing. Do you think that model is really sustainable?
The planning model, long-term planning model?
The model that relies on planning to get money from investors, basically.
I don't think it is, because it's, look, there are examples of companies that have survived on that. So, but you can survive on all sorts of things that, there's outlier examples, right? The problem with relying on investor money in perpetuity, which is what a lot of companies we compete with are just losing buckets and buckets and buckets of money that they've had VCs pumping in more because their aim is market share and growth. But at some point, the economy changes. Interest rates go up and VC money dries up, or there's a pandemic. Who knows? A million things can happen that are way out of your control. All things are pretty much out of your control, really, but those are especially out of your control. And that can dry up so fast. And you can be no longer the flavor of the month and the soup of the day or whatever it is, and you're done. And they're moved on because there's a hot new thing that just came out of left field and everyone's into that now. And the investors are putting money into that now. And your thing is now not cool anymore. Who knows, right? To have to depend on that, to me, is very, very flimsy. Now, if you're depending on customers can leave, and all sorts of things can also, you don't control them, you don't control their decisions. But when you build up a customer base, a healthy customer base, you have a lot more what's the word I'm looking for? Resiliency. You're more resilient because if 10% of them choose to leave, you're good because you have the 90% left, right? There's more variability there, more distributed revenue sources versus if that VC decides to leave or the industry is no longer cool, it dries up instantly and you're done. Your terms are terrible or whatever it is. So I do understand why some companies use it to get off the ground. The problem is that it just becomes such easy living, and then you just don't develop the skills to make money. You develop the skills to generate revenue, but you can go broke generating revenue. You can go broke generating $1 billion in revenue if it costs you $1.1 billion to run the business. So I've always felt like, this isn't my thinking. This is just the way it is. The more you practice something, the better off you get at it. And the problem is if you practice spending other people's money, you get good at that. But the harder thing is to learn how to make your own. And if you don't have to, you won't be good at it. And then the time will come where you need to. And it's like being thrown on stage with a guitar and you don't know how to play. What are you going to do? And so a lot of these companies are really struggling right now. So I think you're better off building the skills to make your own money. And then if you want to take outside money for some reason at some point in your business, you have the leverage to do that, but you haven't lost your skills. So it's actually, it could be really beneficial at a future date.
Right.
You could do both,
Yeah, no, I could see that. I think, the one area I can see benefit to that influx of money, if you have created sort of those skills and some good habits, might be if you're just looking to innovate or explore something a little bit new or different, perhaps that you need a little bit of that money to sort of play in that space. And so for you guys, if you're operating through the self-funded thing, when you think of something new, so you released, I don't know, a couple of years ago, maybe, I think I saw you're exploring a calendar now, all of that exploration is still funded through your profits.
Yeah, absolutely. So we don't do anything we can't afford to do. And that's just how it goes. So exploration is just another project. So instead of working on certain core Hey features, the whole team is focused on the calendar. Got it. The calendar out, they'll have calendar and email, and then we'll work on the product as a whole. So we just kind of shift resources a little bit versus we didn't hire a separate team to just work on calendar stuff or whatever. And you just do what you can. If you can't afford to do it, you don't do it, and you wait, or you simplify it, or you have to make a trade-off or whatever it is. But that's it. And I think it depends on the industry. So if you're in the biotech industry, you're almost certainly going to have to raise a bucket full of money, many bucket loads of money, because that's really hard. And it might take 10 years before you can get a drug to market, and you've got FDA regulations and all these tests and clinical trials, expensive. I make business software, and most people my industry is business software, and software is not that. Software is cheap and easy to make. It just is. Yeah. And so to have to raise millions of dollars to do that is ridiculous, in my opinion, compared to raising millions of dollars to come up with a new drug. It really requires that kind of investment. Period. There's no way to do it otherwise. Yeah. It's not that way. A handful of people and each one armed with a laptop and internet access, you're talking 10, 15 grand startup costs for 3 or 4 people, plus of course salaries and the whole thing. But they figure that out as they go. That's all you need. There's no big R&D thing with this kind of stuff. Now there might, like, if you're inventing AI, like if you're open AI and your other companies that are really, truly, truly making something new or require massive amounts of infrastructure to really process petabytes of stuff, all that, like, different story.
Yeah.
Most of the people we're talking about, that we're thinking about in our heads, don't have that situation and don't need to play by those rules.
That makes sense to me. And I would say that probably holds true in the world of advertising that I come from. Even if there's occasional bits of innovation happening, it's within the context of what we generally do. And it's just iterating, I think, more so than innovating in that grand, like coming up with something completely new.
Yeah, and it's in that case, it's human capital and creative minds. And it's not like you have any capital costs.
Right.
I mean, maybe in the old days, or even, I shouldn't say old, even currently, you might have an office space, whatever, right? Because you get some rent.
Yeah.
But okay, you got people talking, thinking, some computers, you're good. You're not. It's different. Like, also, if you're going to open a restaurant, you need, like, industrial ovens, and you actually need stuff,
like physical stuff.
Agencies, you don't need any of those things, right? In software business, you don't need any of those things.
Yeah.
So let's just not fool ourselves into thinking we need millions of dollars to do what we want to do. You just don't.
Yeah. But it's funny, you talked about the old days with offices, and obviously that's kind of a weird world we're in now, where there's this blend of, some companies went remote during the pandemic and decided to stay that way. Some companies went remote and are playing with hybrid formations. Some are now getting to the point of really trying to come back to the office, whether it's 3 days a week, 4 days a week, or even 5 days a week. Now, you guys started remote.
Yes.
And continue to be remote. And how, talk a little bit about what was the thinking behind that, but then how do you guys manage to thrive in that, where so many people seem to struggle?
I think part of it is we're just used to it. We've been working remotely kind of almost since the beginning. Originally, we had 3 people or 4 people, and we were all in Chicago, and we did share an office space with someone. It wasn't our space, it was someone else's space, and we shared it. But we still kind of worked remotely, sort of. And then David, who's my business partner today, he's lived in Denmark. And he was in Denmark, and I was in Chicago, and we were working 7 time zones apart, and did that for many years, and realized that works just fine. Then the next person we hired lived in Utah, I think, Utah or Idaho, Utah at the time. And that worked out too. And we just never thought it couldn't work, because it just worked. We didn't have an existential debate about, should we be a remote company or a local company, or should we just, who are the best people we can work with, and I don't care where they are. Until it doesn't work, why stop working that way? And so we just kind of grew up like that. We had a lot of practice. What happened during the pandemic, of course, is, and it wasn't anyone's fault, they just got thrown into this very foreign way of working. And what they tried to do was they tried to simulate the office remotely. That does not work very well. Yeah. Because it's worse. If, for example, if you're a meeting heavy culture and then you try to have all your meetings on Zoom, it's worse on Zoom. It's just worse in every way. It's exhausting. It's staring into a camera for hours on end. You get a bunch of talking heads across. It's just, you don't have any of the personal interactions. So it's worse. So these companies that were doing it, having a meeting culture before, are having a worse meeting culture now. And companies that had to only do things in real time are finding it harder to do, and they're chatting more, and that's totally distracting and a terrible way to work, and all these things. So they just, understandably, they got thrown into it, so they didn't have time to think about it. But then they carry those bad habits with them along, and they just never had the time to come up with good habits. So now they're falling back to their comfort place, which is, let's go back to the office where we knew how to do it. Yeah, I understand that, and for some companies, I think it probably does make sense. We just happen to get, I would say, lucky, because we just knew how to do this. We've always been doing this. So for us, there was absolutely no change in the way we worked when COVID came. The only thing that was different for us is we used to get together as a company twice a year with these meetups. Like next week, we're actually in Barcelona. The whole company is in Barcelona. Cool. We get together for a week. We get to see each other, share meals, share smiles, be in the same room, shake hands, whatever, give hugs, the whole thing. And that's important. And we lost that during COVID for a couple of years, and we found it was very important to still see each other physically at least a couple times a year for a couple weeks. Yeah. That was the only change that but everything else worked the exact same way.
Yeah, I think that coming together, I think it's interesting because I think some people will talk about how being in the office creates some of those social bonds and all that stuff. But it sounds like what your approach is get together and have like real connection time for a week straight, a couple times a year, sort of accomplishes some of those same things where people sort of get to know each other on a deeper level, feel that sense of human connection, and that sort of carries through as they're now having to partner with each other on projects. Is that? Yep. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I think it's tricky for me to talk about it in a sense because I just live in it. So I don't, we're just used to it, but, I think remote does not work if you try to simulate the in-person experience. Remote is far more of an asynchronous style method where you write things up in detail, you post them, people get back to you when they have a chance. It's not all these real-time conversations. You're not interrupting people all the time. You're not pulling people off things all the time like you might in an office setting. Yeah, because it's so easy just to walk to someone's desk and like interrupt them. Very careful about that. So it's a very different way of working, and I think it's an important shift if you want to make it work well for you.
Okay. Yeah. I think a lot of people should look more into that asynchronous thing, because I do think it's such a clear distinction between that kind of constant sort of pester culture that we're used to versus giving people time to do things and then allowing people to absorb new information at their own pace so that they can have the focus time to do what they want to do. So I think a lot of this stuff you're talking about, shows up for me with a word that you have sort of an interesting perspective on. So I want to dive into it for a second, which is culture. So I think you posted recently something along the lines of like, you don't create culture, culture happens, or something like that, which sort of makes sense to me in the sense that it's the actions that define the culture more so than what you might put on a whiteboard or put in a presentation or put in some kind of a fancy presentation. But you have this culture that seems to work for you guys. Based on the actions you've taken. Is there any point at which you think about it in any larger than the immediate decisions that are right in front of you?
Right. So to summarize my take on it, basically, culture just is. You don't make it, form it. It just forms. It's just made, and it's based on behavior. How everyone treats each other at a company, basically. It's not the values you hold; it's the actions that you take. It's like you walk into a rental car company, and there's a big list of, we believe in 10 things we care about our customers behind the thing, and you're sitting there waiting for 45 minutes. The place is dirty and they're rude to you. It's like that list is not the culture. The culture is my experience in that space at that time. That's what a company is. And I've always thought of it as like a 50-day moving average. It's kind of like, and that's good because it's changeable, but it's steady enough. But if you want to get better, you can get better quickly, but you can also get bad quickly. But it's really representative of how we've been. What are the local trends across the company? You can alter it by altering your behavior. You cannot alter it by writing something up and posting a list of principles. Cannot. I mean, unless that changes your behavior. Yeah. In that case, yes. But you have it. In the end, it all has to come down to the point of honesty. Like, is this how you are, or is it how you wish you were? And I've always thought of the culture is the weather. It's not the forecast. The forecast is it's going to be 70 out today. The weather is I walk outside and it's 58. I don't give a shit what the forecast is. Like, it's 58. That's the culture. The culture is 58 degrees. It's not the 70 you wish it was or you thought it was going to be. That's the best way I could put it.
I like that description. I think what could be interesting for people to explore there is, if we know that our behavior and our actions and the weather are culture, what are the means through which you can honestly observe and assess it, and then whatever works for you. To your point, if you write something on a list and it changes your behavior, then please, by all means, do that. But if you can simply change your behavior by talking to your coworker and saying, that was kind of weird last month when we were all doing this thing. What if we don't do that? Like, that might be all you need. And so it's up to each company and perhaps some of the people in leadership to just figure out what works, but don't stand on the posters as your culture. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that the real, again, it's okay to write it down and to think it through. You can think about it. You can say how you want things to be. You can rally the troops to change. All that can be very useful.
Yeah.
But a second later, it doesn't matter anymore. What matters is how are we?
Yeah.
How are we really? That's what really matters. So yeah, I don't want to discourage people from. Some people feel like it's this fatalist thing where it's like, well, it just is.
Yeah.
Well, it is. It just is. But you can, of course, change it.
Yeah.
Through actions. It's not about just fatalism. Like,
yeah.
It's crappy. You can make it better. And if it's bad, if it's great, it can go bad.
Yeah.
Based on how
I can see people getting that fatalist attitude about it if they don't recognize that there is the power to change it, and then it's up to them to decide how they make those changes.
Yes.
So I think, one last thing on sort of within the realm of culture, you talked about meetings at the beginning, that you're not really a meeting culture. How did that happen?
Well, it's similar to the answer. I forget what the question was, but the answer was like, we just want to make progress. Like, how'd you land on the system? I don't like meetings. I don't like them. I don't like sitting in them. I don't like having them. I don't think they're very efficient. And to the point about progress, I don't feel like we make a lot when you have them. Now, we do have a lot of conversations at the company. So to me, a meeting is like 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever people. We have a lot of one-on-one conversations.
Yeah.
People working on something. So a programmer or a designer might catch up on Zoom or on a phone call or whatever as frequently as they need to. But that's not a meeting to me. That's just like two people talking about something. So it's not that we don't talk and we don't communicate. There's a lot of that. But there's not many people in those rooms, in those places. That becomes a meeting when people have to just sit around and either they're not involved or they are and they're over involved, or there's too many people have to explain why they're there or prove their existence by chiming in ways they don't need to. And it goes long. And at the end, you're like, what do we do? And gosh, couldn't we have handled this in 12 minutes instead of 45 or an hour? That's a meeting. Two people talking. Like I was talking to Scott, who's one of our designers working on this calendar together. And earlier today, I'm like, hey, are you free at, around noon Pacific? He's like, sure. So I sent him a Zoom link and we talked for like 8 minutes. And we just went over something that we needed to look at. I'm like, I got this idea. What do you think of this? Or I ran into this. And we just, chatted and talked and looked at things together and then hung up. It wasn't on either of our calendars. It wasn't scheduled in advance. It's like, hey, you got a few minutes? And he could have said, no, I don't. I'm with my kids or picking something up at the store. But how about 2? I'm like, yeah, actually 2 doesn't work for me. What about 3? He's like, yeah, 3 works. And then we would just like catch up around 3. It doesn't have to be 3. It could be 3:08. It does and I would just call him or send him a link or whatever, or I'd share a screenshot in Basecamp, whatever it might be. We hammer it out and we move on.
Yeah.
Meetings are these scheduled events of people that take up time. Conversations are not those things.
Yeah, they seem a lot more natural, a lot more sort of fluid and intuitive. And I'm a little jealous that 5 people is a meeting to you, because I'm used to much bigger 50-person craziness.
I would just
even 5 people can create a pretty clunky meeting. I will agree.
And I've been like, before I was doing this stuff, we were a web design company. So we were a creative services firm, and I've been in these meetings with lots of people and different stakeholders. I know it. And that's all the more reason why when I started my own thing, like, I don't want to do that. So we're not going to do that.
Yeah. No, I love that. I think there's a lot of interesting, and to your point earlier, a little bit counterintuitive stuff that you guys do that I think is part of the reason I follow you, because some of them are counterintuitive. Some of them I think they're intuitive, but they just seem crazy. Because like, if you raised your hand in your company and you said, how about we do it this way? How about we do it this way? They would be like, not only do I not really understand what you're saying, but if we were to take that at face value, I would have no idea how to actually make it so in my company. And I think one thing I wonder about with you guys, I'm sure people ask you at sometimes, they've read your book and they go like, can you help us do this? Have you ever sort of consulted people on how to sort of apply the 37 signals approach?
I mean, those are the books. So the books and Shape Up especially Shape Up is a very specific like look at how we really work day to day. that's the best we can do because we're busy doing our own thing. We're not a consulting company.
Yeah.
If we were, then I think we could help a lot more people in very specific ways. But the best way I think we can help people is by showing them how we actually do it. So I've been putting these live design reviews up on YouTube. Occasionally we'll record 3 of us looking at some work together and talking it out and figuring out like what works, what doesn't. Here's some ideas. And I just would record those. It might go for 45 minutes or 25 minutes or whatever, and put those up as is. Like there's no editing. This is just it. And just letting people see some of that has been helpful for people to go, oh, that's how they make decisions, or that's how they do it. Or wow, there's only 3 people there. And wow, they just like made a call and they didn't have to like ask anyone else. And just seeing that, I think is the best way to teach people. I think books are great, but books form a certain foundation, but you have to see it in action and you got to do it to learn. You cannot learn how to play guitar through a book.
Right.
You just can't. You can learn the music theory, you can learn, but you got to play, and that's the same thing I think with this kind of stuff is you've got to play. You've got to try these ideas at your company and see what happens.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure some people are, because you do have a lot of great books. Your LinkedIn stuff that both you and David put out are really interesting. When I think about what I'm trying to do here, this general idea of desuckifying work, I certainly put you in this category of people who are already doing it and you have your way of doing it. If you ever think sort of more big picture about the broader world of work, and if you thought, how could I sort of wave a magic wand and make it better for people? What would that look like if work was just suddenly a lot better for people?
I think it'd be something more people actually look forward to. In some ways, Mondays are not great for a lot of people. So in some way, I'd like to make Mondays better, like, hey, we're going to do something this week. This is going to be fun. I'm excited to get back in there and do that and not feel like it's this thing that's going to suck. It's your point. Desuckify. I mean, it's really your word here.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing that's really joyful about work is making progress. And I think a lot of people are stuck in running in circles, doing a lot of work, but not getting anywhere, feeling very busy, but not making any meaningful progress. And so to help people make more progress, which is what Shape Up's all about, and some of our other ideas, I think is really helpful. It could be very meaningful for people. And I'd like to see more people just making more progress. It's a wonderfully rewarding experience to make progress on things.
Yeah, I get that. I think
very depressing to just be stuck on something,
Yeah.
Not that like sometimes getting stuck is I enjoy like creatively, how do we solve this?
Right.
Like there's something, but that's a good kind of stuck. But the bad kind of stuck is like, we're just like, we're not going anywhere. This is just like in loops. We're just another meeting about the thing we just talked about. And like, why are they just, everyone's changing their mind all the time. We're not making any progress here. We're just sitting here and yet we're busy or I'm waiting for something from someone. That's the kind of stuck. It's no good.
Yeah. I mean, I think everybody can probably relate to that kind of stuck, because it's basically like everything sort of collapses, all the structure, everything that was in place collapses. And now you're just in this soup of nothing and you can't get out of it, but yet you're pointing to something that you feel like you have to get to. So you spend weeks and weeks and weeks just stuck. So I think the idea of progress makes a lot of sense. I know for people in my business that I've come from, there's nothing worse than working in a job and you look back after a year and you go, what did I really do? And, we're in a world where you're dependent on your portfolio and you need to show what you've done, and you can kind of go, well, I had that one thing, versus like 6 weeks, I got a thing, 6 weeks, I got a thing, 6 weeks, I got a thing. There is a lot of joy in that. It sounds so simple, but back to human nature, I think we're wired to feel joy when we accomplish something,
Yes. And the other thing is, 100% with all that. And the other thing is that I think it's important also to look at the work you're doing and recognize that it depends on the work you're doing. But like the work we're doing, we should be able to move quickly. Like we're not building widgets that require supply chains and advanced machinery and trips to China to check out the factory. Like we're not learning how different metals interact and how you bring glass and steel together. So there's perfect cut lines. Like that is hard and can take years. I can imagine. But software specifically, or services like the business you're in and others, I'm not saying the creative process is instant, but like there's just so few barriers truly to making progress. And if you're not, that's really a shame, because there's nothing in the way really except these man-made obstacles, these bumps that we create. It really is relatively simple until you make it hard. It just is. And so anyway, hopefully anyone who's listening to this can, maybe this is some fuel for them to make a little bit more progress this year, 5%, 10% more progress this year. Ship 2 things instead of 1, or 15 instead of 10. Like get some more stuff out there into the world.
Yeah, I think people hopefully will, and I think that feeling of being stuck is tough, and I recommend people follow you and read the books and all that stuff. So before we go, what's the easiest way for people to find you and keep up on what you guys are doing?
It probably depends where they are. So if you're on LinkedIn, find me on LinkedIn, Jason Fried on LinkedIn, and my business partner, David Heinemeier Hansson, he puts out great stuff too. We're both on Twitter as well. He's DHH on Twitter, or X, whatever. I'm Jason Fried. And then we both have newsletters and blogs, personal newsletters and blogs that cover a lot of these topics, which is what we're looking at. So those are at world.hey.com/Jason or world.hey.com/DHH.
Okay.
That's probably what I'd recommend. And then you can also email me just directly, Jason at 37 Signals, or Jason at basecamp.com, or Jason at hey.com. You can hit me up in person if that would be helpful, and hopefully that can be helpful.
Yeah, no, I think that's all great. I think you can find the books through the 37 Signals site as well, right?
Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah, 37 Signals/books or basecamp.com/books. Either one will get you there.
Awesome. Well, Jason, I really appreciate you coming on. I think a ton of stuff that'll get people thinking in a different way, which is exactly what we want to happen. So thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks. I loved chatting with you, TJ. Thanks. It was really, questions were great, and I like the flow. So thanks for having me here.
Awesome. Thanks, Jason. Bye-bye. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. And thanks to Jason for making way too much sense for one podcast. You can follow Jason on LinkedIn and subscribe to his blog at world.hey.com/Jason. Visit 37signals.com to learn more about the company and their counterintuitive approach to work. I also highly recommend checking out their books at 37signals.com/books. Try not to get overwhelmed by all of that desuckification. Bye, everyone.